So I've had a lot of different whiskies this year, and it's the time of year where a bunch of different whiskey YouTubers are now announcing their whiskey of the year. And I thought I'll do the same. So welcome to First Fill, I'm Phil, and I'm going to fill you in about my top whiskies of 2021. So after a lot of consideration, I've now picked my whiskey of the year. But in this video, I'm not only going to talk about my whiskey of the year, I'm going to talk about my 5 nominations for whiskey of the year. And it just means that, no matter what market you're in, because it's just so different around the world about what whiskies you can actually get your hands on. So it means that hopefully you can try one of these whiskies, one of my nominations on this list at your local bar in your market. However, there are a few key conditions I like to have in my whiskey of the year. And the first one is, it can't be the same as last year's nominations for Whiskey of the Year, because I kind of want to keep pushing the boat out for you. I kind of want to keep taking you down new roads on your whiskey journey. So I don't want to just keep recommending the same whiskies again and again. But I still really rate the 5 whiskies I did choose last year. So if you haven't watched that video, go watch it over there. They're all great whiskies, and I definitely recommend them as well. And the second category is these whiskies need to be whiskies that you can actually find. Look, I don't want to put forward some random obscure 1970s whiskies or some whiskey from some single cask at some event in Scotland. Those are not the whiskies I'm putting forward. I want the whiskies I'm recommending to you to be actually pragmatic, to be whiskies that you can actually find in your market. And look, there's no promises. I know it's just different around the world. There's some standard whiskies that you can't get in some markets, and then other markets can. So hopefully one of the whiskies on this list you'll be able to find where you are. And the third condition is I want these whiskies to be actually pretty good value. Look, there's no point me putting forward whiskies that are like $1,000, even though there's probably a lot of $1,000 whiskies that would just dominate all the whiskies on this list. But I don't know, it's not very practical. Most of you are not going to be buying those types of whiskies. And some of the whiskies on this list will be a little bit expensive, but I don't want them to be so far out of reach that none of you will actually try them. And the fourth category is I want the whiskies to have pretty good stats. And what is that? So that's above 46%, unchill filtered, natural color, and an age statement. And look, most of these whiskies don't actually fit all of those categories, but I want them to at least fit most of them. And enough talking about all that, let's jump to our first nomination. That's the Kilhoun Lockgore. So I know I've already talked a lot about this whiskey on my channel in my last few videos, and it's also kind of part of the reason why I think it should be on this list, because it's a fantastic whiskey. So a little bit about the Lockgore. Well, firstly, it's from the Kilhoun distillery, which is one of the newer distilleries on the Isle of Islay, and it fits the stereotype of Islay as well. It's a smoky, peaty whiskey, a peat smoke whiskey. But it does one thing really well that a lot of other Islay whiskies don't do, and that is it's aged in sherry casks. So this one has this really awesome combination between the smoke and the bacon notes and the brine and the peat with the kind of the fruity, rich berries and Christmas cake notes from the sherry cask. And you just get this really well-rounded, complex, smoky, sherried whiskey. It's quite well-rounded. It's not as sharp as some of the non-sherried whiskies. So yeah, I mean, if you kind of like the sort of Lagavulin direction of Islay whiskies, you'll probably like this one. And this whiskey meets all the stats. It's 46%, it's unchill filtered, natural color. It doesn't have kind of a specific age statement, but it does have this little tag where it does tell you the age. It says it's matured for a minimum of 9 years. And I think part of the reason there's not an age statement is that it's still a young distillery relatively, but I think as Kilhoun starts to grow up, we will start to see some age-stated releases in the future where they can start releasing older whiskies on a more consistent basis. So yeah, look out for that. And look out for this. This is a great whiskey, the Kilhoun Lockgore. And now on to my next nomination, the Glengarry 12. So this is the Glengarry 12, and I think this is the most overlooked bottle in Scotch whiskey. It really is fantastic, and I discovered this whiskey when I was doing my video with Henwood from Eat, Smoke, Drink, and we compared this to kind of the 30-year-old version. But what really surprised me was how well this whiskey held up. And even since then, how well this whiskey is held up against most of my other 12-year-olds. At this point, I would say this is probably my favorite 12-year-old on the shelf right now. It's from the Highland region and it's owned by Beam Suntory, who also own Lefroy and Auchentoshan. And it's just a fantastic whiskey. It has great stats. So it's unchill filtered. I don't know if it's natural color, but I wouldn't be surprised knowing that it's aged in sherry casks. It could be natural, but regardless, it's great. And also, it's bottled at 48%, so this is a punchy, tasty dram. It's beautifully aromatic. And one of the things I really like about it is the balance of this whiskey. It's really well balanced between the spirit and kind of the cask notes, those sherry cask notes. No kind of flavor is kind of dominating the other, and you kind of get this really well-rounded, dynamic whiskey. So yeah, I think it's a great whiskey. I got it for a reasonably good price in New Zealand. The one thing I'd say is it is an invasive malt, meaning that, you know, it kind of appears on the New Zealand market just randomly, then it disappears again, then it appears. So I don't know if you'll be able to find this whiskey, but if you can, I definitely do recommend it. Great dram. So let's jump on to my next nomination, and that is the Arran 18. So this is the Arran 18, and when I posted my list of my nominations for Whiskey of the Year on Patreon, this was the one that was voted for the most. This was the whiskey that the patrons thought would be the Whiskey of the Year, and I agree, it's an absolutely fantastic whiskey. In fact, it won Whiskey of the Year in the Oswars, which is the online Scotch Whisky Awards hosted by Roy from Aquavitae and Ralphie from Ralphie.com. And the Arran 10 won the Best Scotch Whisky of 2021 in those awards, and that's a younger whiskey than this, and I would argue this is a much better, more richer, complex whiskey than that. So a little bit of background about this whiskey. So firstly, it's from the unofficial region of the islands, from the Isle of Arran. And it also has great stats. Everything with Arran always has great stats. It's 46%, unchill filter, natural color, and has an age statement of 18 years. But also what I really like about this whiskey is not just the stats, it's the smell and taste. And one key thing that this whiskey does really well is it has this kind of contradiction going for it. It's really delicate, but at the same time it's really complex. And also as well, the sherry casks have done a lot of good things to this whiskey. It has those classic Arran flavors like your toffee apple, your pineapple, your banana. But with the sherry cask influence, it also introduces these kind of berry notes, these spice notes, these red fruit notes, and it just works really well. So I think if you're willing to spend a little bit more money, want to go for a high in age statement, the Arran 18 is a great pick. It can be hard to find now. I think a lot of people are also looking for this whiskey. And look, I don't have many 18-year-olds currently, but I would say this is the best 18-year-old I have on the shelf right now. It's absolutely fantastic. And just one thing I'd say if you do end up trying this whiskey is make sure you let it sit in the glass for a decent amount of time. It's like that saying that people say, a year in the cask is a minute in the glass. So it'd be great if you can let this whiskey sit in the glass for about 18 minutes and watch as the whiskey really opens up and it just becomes a more interesting whiskey that gets unlocked over time. So yeah, little tip for you there. And now onto my next nomination, and that is the Port Charlotte 10. So if you know a little bit about Islay whiskies, you know that they're kind of known for being smoky whiskies. And I've had a lot of people ask me, what is my kind of go-to top 10-year-old standard release whiskey from Islay? And my answer normally is this one. This is a fantastic smoky dram. And so a little bit about this whiskey. It's from the Islay, and it's from the Bruichladdich Distillery. Look, a lot of people get confused about the Bruichladdich Distillery, and they don't realise that Port Charlotte is actually part of that distillery, not a separate distillery. And I'll quickly show you. So yeah, all three of these distilleries are from the Bruichladdich Distillery. You've got the classic Laddie, which is their sort of unpeated malt, the Port Charlotte 10, which is their peated malt, and then you've got the super heavily, super smoky, basically cask strength whiskey, which is the Octomore. Which is a lot more expensive than these two. But out of those three whiskies from the Bruichladdich Distillery, this is the one I'm rebuying the most. This is a great go-to Islay whiskey. And that's what's really interesting about the Bruichladdich Distillery. It's one of the newer distilleries. Well, it was kind of reopened relatively recently, and it's punching above its weight. And a lot of people online are now making this whiskey their go-to Islay whiskey, even over the more established, bigger whiskies like Ardbeg, Lagavulin, and Laphroaig. I really think the Port Charlotte is doing great things, along with Kilhoun. And the stats for this whiskey are impressive as well. So it has an age statement, 10 years old, it's unchill filtered, natural colour, and this one is bottled at 50%. This is what's really interesting about this distillery, is that they're kind of standard release entry-level whiskies they bring out into the market start at 50%, which is incredible. And the same with the Classic Laddie, it's 50%. So you're getting a lot of value for your money with this whiskey. So even though maybe the Ardbeg 10 might be a bit cheaper, well, this one's going to be slightly higher ABV. So it means that you're still getting really good value for this whiskey. But with all these good stats, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be great whiskey. Well, this one is, and that's why it's my go-to dram. It's aged in first fill ex-bourbon casks and then in second fill French wine cask. I don't know which French wine, but I think it's a subtle influence, but it really makes this a really interesting smoky Islay whiskey. It's briny, it's smoky, it's those bacon notes. It also has this really nice honeysuckle note. It's a really great dram and definitely deserves to be on my list for the Whiskey of the Year for 2021. But now, before we jump on to the Whiskey of the Year for 2021, I just want to talk about a special mention whiskey, and that is the Compass Box Spice Tree. So this is the Compass Box Spice Tree, which is a blended malt whiskey. You're probably thinking, why have I added a blended whiskey to my special mention this year? Well, the thing is, Compass Box have really opened my eyes about how good a blended whiskey can actually be. Because I think the thing is, the kind of stereotype, blended whiskies are often quite generic, they're quite diluted, and I mean, that's generally how I view my most blended generic whiskies. They feel watered down. It's almost like they're tailoring to the biggest audience possible, so they make this kind of more diluted product that has less character than a lot of the single malts, which is why I generally drink single malts, and maybe that's more of a snobby thing, I don't know. But single malts are generally seen as a more premium product than blended whiskies. Not this one though. It really is a whiskey where they've taken single malts and they've blended them together, and it really is greater than the sum of its parts. And it has great stats. It's above 46%, it's unchill filtered, it's natural colour. And it just tastes great. The flavour of this whiskey, the nutmeg, the baking spices, the cinnamon, it's really good. And I really think if you drink a lot of single malt and you want to try a blended whiskey, Compass Box is a great place to start. They've got a really interesting background. They're all about transparency. In fact, they're often so transparent that it's got them in trouble with the Scotch Whisky Association. But I'll get more into that if I do a specific review of this whiskey. But yeah, I recommend it. It definitely deserves to be the special mention of my top whiskies of the year for this video. And now on to my Whiskey of the Year. So this is the Glen Scotia 15. This is an absolutely fantastic whiskey from the Campbelltown region. So I think when most people think of Campbelltown, they think of the big famous distillery called Springbank, which especially among whiskey geeks has become so sought after. In fact, I would assume most people watching this probably wouldn't even be able to buy a bottle right now if you checked your local bottle store. It's that sought after. It's sold out really fast. But Glen Scotia are also in Campbelltown, and when I bought this bottle, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I heard some good reviews, and I was blown away by the nose and the palate. It was absolutely fantastic. And in fact, it wasn't really meant to be in my list of top whiskies of the year. But as soon as I tried it, and then it had really good reachability, it kept me coming back to it. It was really tasty, it was really complex. It just jumped to the top of the list. And I was like, this is my whiskey of the year. It has everything going for it. It's reachable, has great value, has great stats. It's 46% unchill filtered. I don't know if it's natural colour. It doesn't say it's natural colour, which is interesting because the Victoriana, which is the cask strength version, says it's natural colour. But regardless of that, as I said at the start of the video, it's not about getting all those stats. At the end of the day, the smell and taste. And this one has incredible smell and taste, and it gets those other stats right anyway. And yeah, Glen Scotia's doing great things at the moment. I mean, it says it's aged in ex-bourbon cask, but I do believe there must be some ex-sherry cask in there as well. Because yeah, it has some really nice vanilla and zesty notes, which are mixed up with some really nice kind of dried apricot and dried fruit notes. I originally tried this whiskey about 5 years ago, which was when it was in its old bottling, which is probably the grossest bottle I've ever seen. In terms of bottle design, the old bottles, I was not a fan, Absolutely not a fan. I am a fan of this though. I really like the heavy glass. It feels like a really nice, good looking, traditional whiskey. So it definitely deserves to be my whiskey of the year for 2021. Because yeah, it's a great whiskey. And I think if you can try some at your local bar, or if someone has a bottle, or even if you buy a bottle, I think you're gonna have a great time with this one. So if you like this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. I absolutely appreciate you guys. Fantastic, you keep the channel going. And if you want to join me on Patreon, the link is down in the description below. But above all, make sure you share your whiskey and enjoy. Beauty.